The one psychological weakness that makes you easy to manipulate. The man who does not think for himself is a slave to the thoughts of others. Arthur Schopenhauer. Imagine this. You wake up one morning and everything feels normal. You scroll through your phone, sip your coffee, get dressed for the day. But something is off. You can't put your finger on it yet. But as you step out into the world, you begin to notice something unsettling. Everyone around you is moving, speaking, and thinking in patterns so predictable, it's as if they're following an invisible script. Conversations feel rehearsed. Opinions sound borrowed. Even your own thoughts, when you examine them closely, don't entirely feel like they're your own. And then a chilling realization dawns on you. What if they never were? What if right now, at this very moment, the way you see yourself, the way you perceive reality, and the choices you believe to be your own, have been subtly shaped by forces you never even questioned? The scariest prison is the one you don't realize you're in. You think you're making free choices, that your beliefs, fears, and desires are uniquely yours. But what if they were implanted? What if, instead of being the master of your mind, you have been walking through life on autopilot, guided by a single psychological weakness so powerful that anyone who understands it can control you without you ever noticing? Think of the decisions you've made, your career, your relationships, even your values. How many of them were truly yours? How many were whispered into your subconscious by a society that thrives on keeping you compliant? And here's the real paradox. The smarter you are, the more vulnerable you might be to this hidden weakness. Because intelligence alone doesn't make you immune to manipulation. It often makes you blind to it. The belief that you are too rational, too self-aware, too independent to be controlled, is the very thing that makes you easy to control. So the question remains, what is this one psychological weakness that makes you so easy to manipulate? And once you see it, will you ever be able to unsee it? The hidden problem and its psychological philosophical roots. The answer to the question, the single greatest psychological weakness that makes you easy to manipulate, is your need for validation. At first, it seems harmless. Validation is, after all, a fundamental part of being human. From the moment we are born, we seek approval, first from our parents, then from teachers, peers, authority figures, and eventually from society itself. We crave recognition, acknowledgement, a sense of belonging. But what if this need is the very thing that enslaves you? The invisible chains of validation. Think back to childhood. Remember the first time you were praised for doing something right? Maybe it was getting a good grade, following a rule, or simply being agreeable. That rush of approval conditioned you, reinforcing a simple yet powerful lesson. Do what pleases others and you will be rewarded. Now fast forward to adulthood. The stakes have changed, but the game hasn't. You still seek approval, just in more sophisticated ways. You carefully curate your words, your actions, even your personality to fit the expectations of those around you. You dress a certain way because it signals status. You post online in a way that gets likes. You hold back your real thoughts for fear of judgment. You follow trends without questioning who started them. And then, there's the deeper layer, the one that truly makes you a pawn in a larger game. Governments, corporations, and ideological movements all understand one thing. If you can control what people seek validation for, you control them. Carl Jung, The False Self and the Collective Mask. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society. It is a carefully constructed identity designed to gain approval while hiding the deeper, more complex parts of ourselves. Jung warned that when people become too identified with their persona, they lose touch with their true self. They become a hollow reflection of what society expects, rather than what they truly are. Now think about how this plays out in the modern world. Society tells you who you should be, what you should believe, and what you should desire. If you step outside the lines, you risk ridicule, alienation, or even cancellation. The message is clear: conform or be cast out. And so most people comply, not because they believe in the rules, but because the fear of disapproval is greater than the desire for truth. But there's an even darker layer to this. Nietzsche's warning, the herd mentality. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who saw through the illusions of morality and power, wrote about the herd, the masses who follow societal norms without questioning them. According to Nietzsche, most people do not think for themselves. They inherit their values, their opinions, and even their sense of right and wrong from the culture around them. And here's the terrifying part. They believe they are making their own choices. But in reality, they are just following the emotional currents dictated by the collective. They react, they conform, and they seek approval from the herd, because standing alone is too painful. And this is why manipulation is so easy. Once you understand that humans are wired to seek validation, you don't need to force them to obey. You simply need to control what they believe will earn them approval. This is why propaganda works. This is why marketing works. This is why entire nations can be led into war, why people will willingly sacrifice their freedom, and why millions will follow leaders without question. Because they are not searching for truth, they are searching for approval. And the question you must ask yourself is this: how much of your life has been dictated by the invisible need to be accepted? How many times have you silenced yourself to fit in? How many decisions have you made based on what looks right rather than what is right? And most importantly, what would you do? Who would you become if you no longer cared about validation? The unseen consequences. Imagine this. You wake up one morning and realize that every thought, every decision, every belief you hold was never truly yours. From the way you dress to the way you speak, from the things you desire to the things you fear, each one was subtly shaped by forces you never questioned. The media, your family, your education, your culture, even the algorithms feeding you content online. You were never explicitly told what to value. Instead, you were conditioned to seek validation in ways that ensured you would stay compliant, predictable, and most importantly, easy to manipulate. This is the terrifying reality most people never wake up from. The mechanisms of mass manipulation. So how exactly does this work? It happens in ways so subtle, so deeply ingrained in everyday life, that we don't even recognize it as manipulation. Here's how it plays out. 1. The illusion of choice. You think you are making your own decisions. But are you? Take a look at modern consumerism. Every major brand, every political campaign, every influencer, every piece of entertainment you consume is carefully designed to guide your emotions toward a predetermined outcome. Think about it. Trends aren't random, they are created. Desires aren't organic, they are implanted. Opinions aren't independent, they are engineered. You are nudged toward behaviors that benefit someone else, whether it's a corporation, a political movement, or an ideology. But because your choices feel personal, you never stop to question who put them there in the first place. 2. Social media, the validation machine. The digital age has taken our need for validation and weaponized it. Every like, every comment, every retweet is a microdose of approval, a digital nod that tells you, yes, you belong. But there's a hidden price. Your thoughts, your self-worth, even your emotional stability are now dependent on an algorithm. What does this mean? You hesitate to post something that might not get likes. You self-censor to avoid backlash. You tailor your personality to be more acceptable online. In short, you conform, not because you are forced to, but because the fear of disapproval is stronger than the desire for authenticity. 3. The fear of being different. History has shown us time and time again that the individual who thinks for themselves is often seen as a threat. Look at Socrates, condemned to death for corrupting the youth. Look at Galileo, silenced for challenging the church. Look at anyone who has ever dared to step outside the norm. They were ridiculed, ostracized, or worse. The herd mentality isn't just a metaphor, it is a psychological reality. The collective punishes those who break free because independent thinkers disrupt the illusion of consensus. This is why most people deep down are afraid to challenge the status quo. The idea of being alone, of losing approval, of being cast out, is a primal fear stronger than logic itself. And so they stay in line. They go with the flow. They obey. 4. Manufactured outrage and division. Here's a harsh truth. Most of what you are outraged about was chosen for you. Look around. Everywhere you turn, people are angrier than ever. But have you ever stopped to ask why? The reason is simple. Rage is profitable. When people are divided, they are easier to control. The more emotional you are, the less rational you become. And the less rational you are, the more easily you can be steered toward a cause, a product, a belief system, without ever realizing you're being played. Governments do this. Media companies do this. Activists and corporations do this. Why? Because outrage keeps you distracted while they shape the world in ways that serve their interests, not yours. The true cost of being manipulated. Now pause and ask yourself, what has this weakness cost you personally? Have you ever sacrificed your happiness just to fit in? Have you ever silenced your real thoughts to avoid disapproval? Have you ever made a life decision, career, relationships, beliefs, based on what was expected of you, rather than what you truly wanted? If the answer is yes, then you've already experienced the psychological prison of validation. And this is the hidden tragedy of it all. Most people will live their entire lives trapped in this cycle, never realizing they were being manipulated from the very start. But what if there was a way out? What if you could break free from the need for validation, reclaim your independence, and see the world as it truly is, without the fog of manipulation? That's what we're about to uncover next. Stay with me as we dive into Section 4. The Rebellion, How to Break Free, 800 to 1,000 words, where we explore the radical shift that will change everything. The Rebellion, How to Break Free. Imagine this. One day, you wake up, and something inside you shifts. The world looks the same, but you see it differently. You notice the invisible strings, the psychological tricks, the way people chase approval like starving dogs chasing scraps. And for the first time, you feel something you've never felt before. Freedom. Not the kind of freedom they sell you, the freedom to buy things, to follow trends, to fit in. No, this is something deeper. The freedom of someone who no longer needs permission to think, act, or exist. This is the moment the rebellion begins. But how do you actually break free from manipulation? How do you rewire your mind so that validation no longer controls you? Here's the truth. You have to become dangerous. Not in a reckless, destructive way, but in a way that makes you unshakable, in a way that makes you immune to the tactics used to control and manipulate the masses. Here's how. Step 1. Develop psychological autonomy. The first and most critical step to breaking free is learning to think for yourself, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Most people think their opinions are their own. They're not. They are a patchwork of influences: parents, teachers, media, culture, social circles. To break free, you need to question everything. Ask yourself, where did this belief come from? Who benefits from me thinking this way? Is this truth, or just social conditioning? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Most people never confront their own programming. You must. Because if you don't define your own reality, someone else will do it for you. Step 2. Kill the need for validation. Here's a hard truth. The less you care about approval, the more power you have. Society conditions you to crave validation because a person who needs approval is easy to control. That's why people obsess over likes, followers, compliments, and social status. They don't just want approval, they need it. And that need makes them weak. To escape, you must train yourself to operate without external validation. Here's how. Start doing things in silence. No social media updates, no validation seeking. Just do things for yourself. Say what you actually think. Most people say what's safe. Speak the truth, even when it's unpopular. Get comfortable with disapproval. People will resist your independence. Let them. Their opinions mean nothing. The moment you stop needing validation is the moment you become untouchable. Because if they can't control your emotions, they can't control you. Step 3. Master emotional control. Here's something nobody tells you. The world is not controlled by logic, it is controlled by emotions. Manipulators, politicians, advertisers, they don't persuade you with facts. They persuade you with fear, anger, excitement, hope. If you can't control your emotions, you are a puppet. But if you learn to master them, you become immune to manipulation. So how do you do this? Observe your triggers. What makes you react instantly? That's where you're being controlled. Pause before reacting. Give yourself space to analyze before you respond. Detach from emotional bait. If something is designed to make you outraged, anxious, or fearful, question it. Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." Control yourself or be controlled by others. There is no in-between. Step 4. Embrace the outsider mentality. Most people fear standing alone. But here's the truth. The stronger your mind, the fewer people will relate to you. That's why those who think for themselves, Socrates, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, were often outsiders. Not because they were wrong, but because they refused to conform. If you want to break free, you have to be willing to be different. Accept that some people will misunderstand you. Let go of the need to belong to a group. Be comfortable standing alone in your truth. When you do this, something remarkable happens. The world loses its grip on you. The chains of validation snap, and you realize that you were never trapped to begin with, only asleep. And now, you are awake. The final breakthrough. The ultimate truth. There is one final realization, the most important one of all. It is this. You were never weak. You were made to believe you were. From birth, you were conditioned to doubt yourself, to seek permission, to conform. But that was never your nature. That was a script given to you. The moment you reject that script, you reclaim your power. The question is, will you take it? Or will you remain in the illusion, comfortable but controlled? The choice is yours. And that choice will define your life. If this opened your eyes, don't just sit on it. Share this message. Break the cycle. And most importantly, start living for yourself. The ultimate truth. The final, most powerful realization. Imagine this. You wake up one morning and the world feels different. Not because it has changed, but because you have. The invisible chains that once held you down, seeking approval, fearing rejection, conforming without question, are gone. You step outside, and for the first time, you see things clearly. The conversations, the advertisements, the social expectations, they no longer pull you in. You recognize them for what they are, illusions. And that's when you realize the ultimate truth. You were never weak. You were never meant to be controlled. But from the moment you were born, the world worked to convince you otherwise. They told you to obey, to follow the rules, to seek permission, to doubt yourself. Not because it was the truth, but because a world full of independent thinkers is dangerous to those who seek power. So they fed you a lie that said, you need validation to be worthy. You need approval to belong. You need to follow the system to be safe. And for years, maybe even decades, you believed it. But now that illusion is shattered. And here's what's left. The undeniable, unshakable truth. You are free. Not because the world has granted you freedom, but because you have taken it back. The final paradigm shift. Choosing your own reality. The most powerful realization you can have in life is this. You are the creator of your own reality. Not society, not the media, not your family, not your past, not your fears. You. This means if you decide that you no longer need approval, you don't. If you decide that rejection no longer affects you, it won't. If you decide that no one has the power to control your mind, they don't. You are no longer a passive participant in someone else's game. You set the rules now, and in that moment something incredible happens. You stop being easy to manipulate, because no one can control a mind that is truly free. What happens now? Most people, when faced with this truth, do one of two things. They run back to the illusion. It's safer, more comfortable. It doesn't challenge them. They choose to forget, to ignore what they've seen. They go back to seeking approval, following trends, and letting others dictate their thoughts. Or, they step into their power. They choose a different path. They accept the weight of true freedom, even if it means standing alone. They think for themselves, feel for themselves, and act for themselves. And because of that, they become the kind of person no one can control. Which one will you be? The final challenge. Here's what I challenge you to do. For the next 24 hours, pay attention to how many times you seek approval. Notice when you hesitate to speak your truth because you fear judgment. Notice when you hold back your real thoughts because you want to be accepted. Notice when you crave a like, a comment, or a compliment to feel good about yourself. And then ask yourself, is this real? Or have I been programmed to think this way? Because once you start asking that question, you can never go back. You will see the invisible strings. You will recognize the psychological tricks. And most importantly, you will begin to cut them, one by one, until the only thing left is you, free, unshakable, untouchable. The world will try to pull you back in, and don't let it. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Share your thoughts, your breakthroughs, your questions, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, because this is just the beginning.